Welcome this evening. Our goal is to celebrate our differences. We are indivisible through differences. This was at an indivisible event last year where we had Muslim, Native American, Christian people all singing and celebrating our uniqueness and our indivisibility. So the question is, what is anti-Semitism? Well, there are various aspects to it. This comes from the writings of a group called Aish Torah, and it's described as economic. We hate Jews because they have too much wealth and power. They control world banking, can conspire for world domination. Or we hate Jews because of the chosen people. They arrogantly claim that they are chosen by God. Or we hate Jews because of their scapegoats. The Jews are a convenient group to single out and blame for our economic troubles. And then the strangest one of all to us, of course, is deicide, the idea that we hate Jews because they killed God. They killed Jesus. They are outsiders. We hate Jews because they are different from us and they have dual loyalty. And then the racial theory, we hate Jews because they're an inferior race and they are less than human. Rabbi Talishkin has a little bit of a joke, so I might as well start with something sort of funny. Why are Jews hated? Because we gave the world the 10 Commandments and they still haven't forgiven us for it. I should have put more jokes in this presentation. It's not funny, it just gets more serious. So the Jews are hated for all these reasons. You know, it's interesting because the original word for Jew before Judaism was Ivrim, which means Hebrews, but it was probably a pejorative term, meaning the ones from the other side. Originally, the Jews came from an area that would be called southern Iraq or southern Syria or Iraq, and they came over to the land of Canaan, and they were called the ones from the other side, and it might have been a pejorative term. Judaism has commandments that focus on social justice and making the world a better place. This sometimes means challenging tyranny and correct authority. The tone of Jewish culture is to stand up to even God as God wrestlers, the translation of the name Israel. This is disturbing to people. Jews are commanded to love the stranger 36 times in the Torah. We were strangers in a strange land, and this is disturbing to nationalists and xenophobic empires. The commandments are upsetting to our neighbors. We don't allow hunting. We have dietary restrictions, Shabbat. I know it's hard to believe, but the concept of a day off that was invented by Jews in the Torah, a day off for peoples and animals, was unheard of in the ancient world. So for Jews to demand a day off was seen as some kind of challenge to authority, which it was. The faith and culture also stands for education, learning, achievement, creativity, and success, which stirs up envy or stirred up envy in many of our neighbors at times. And then finally, replacement theology, the idea that the Old Testament, the covenant, is replaced by the New Testament, or Ishmael replaces Isaac on the altar. We'll go into this in more detail as we go along. There are several breeds of anti-Semites. Classical church believes that the Jews killed Jesus and cannot get to heaven unless they convert to Christianity. Classical old school white supremacists like the Nazis of the 30s and 40s who believed Jews were communists. Interestingly, the classical communists who believed Jews were capitalists. And four is something that we see in Southern Oregon that I'll talk about a little bit later, neo-fascists who have created an odd fusion of far left and far right policies. They espouse 9/11 conspiracy theories, white supremacy, Holocaust denial, and support land use issues related to government overreach, for example, the Bundy, Standing Rock, no pipelines, etc. And they support an end to GMOs and support small organic farmers' rights. So it's a strange blend of far left and far right. We'll talk about that more later. There's a new breed of anti-Zionists who hide their hatred of Jews being a goal of seeking an end to Israel. So this was Ashland. That building that you see there was the Wells Fargo Bank today. It was a beautiful hotel at one point. This was in 1920 or 22. I can't remember the year, but there was a march of the Ku Klux Klan. The Klan was very powerful in the 20s throughout Oregon. Members of the legislature were supporters of the Klan or members of the Klan directly. So it's hard to believe that that's our very street, downtown Ashland. So I want to kind of go through first old school anti-Semitism. Look at this crazy headline. Judea declares war on Germany. The Jews of all the world unite in action. This is a fascist publication in the United States that came out of the East Coast to the Midwest that declared that the Jews were actually declaring war on Germany. Well, of course, yeah. So we see the manifestations of right-wing or old-school white supremacy in this poster that was found at one of our universities, handed out around the country, where even the hearings about Kavanaugh were controlled by Jews. Every time some anti-white, anti-American, anti-freedom event takes place, it's the Jews who are behind it. This is old school. This is very interesting. The plight of our nation since days of old. Back to Israel Jews. What's really interesting is that, you know, it's interesting that the white supremacists are actually acknowledging Israel as the homeland of the Jewish people. So we really thank them for that. Brought to you by your local store book club. Again, this is classical, old school, right-wing white supremacy, but don't be fooled. Because then we kind of got into this blend where we see on the very top, we talk about the gigantic Zionist hoax, that there was no Holocaust. Holocaust is a lie. Zionism suddenly comes into the picture and becomes, in modern parlance, in modern contemporary dialogue, the new anti-Semitism is hiding behind its hatred for Israel. I'm not talking about legitimate criticism of Israel, because critique of Israel is not anti-Semitic, but the idea that Israel shouldn't exist. Now this just came out today, because I was looking, as I was putting the slides together, my friend Rabbi Emmanuel Ben David sent me something that I'll show you next. But here it is. This was just today. New York University Jewish Student Center temporarily closes after boycott, divestment, sanctions. BDS supporter shares anti-Semitic, potentially threatening posts. And then really, really terribly scary is take a look at that synagogue down below in France. Not just an armed guard, but literally four soldiers having to guard the door so people can go in and pray. This just came out today. Ann Coulter, Jews hate white men like the rest of the Democratic base. Pretty wild, huh? Microaggression. This I just got from Rabbi Emmanuel. Protests in France over taxes giving rise to anti-Semitic rhetoric. You know, we've been watching the news about Paris and what's going on. Can you imagine the idea that this was caused by Emmanuel Macron as a whore of the Jews and their puppet? That's just in today's Jewish telegraph agency, the AP of the Jewish people. And then it comes locally. This was just about 50 yards behind our synagogue here, along the railroad tracks. Was this about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago maybe? It really freaked us all out just to see this kind of graffiti. What was it meant to convey? Was it ironic? Was it trying to be cute? Was it just an act to intimidate? Well, it really spooked us, and it really, really, really was disturbing to see the Anne Frank oven, so to speak, from an Ashland utility box. Now, here's something fascinating that I want to start with. So this is where the logic or the brilliance of the neo-Nazi, the modern neo-Nazis, very often don't come in the containers that we're used to. We're used to the containers of the white supremacists, like those who marched with tiki torches in Charlottesville by the synagogue, chanting, "Jews will not replace us." We know they're racist against black people. We know their hatred of Jews. But here's, you want to end white privilege? The bottom starts with ending Jewish privilege. So they're using the arguments of the left, so to speak, in order to prove their point, which you have to start ending Jewish privilege. Now look at this. It's the same on the same line. You want to believe we're anti-racist. Well, you're not anti-racist if you're not anti-Zionist. Very interesting, isn't that? Now, once we start coming into Zionism, and again, I just want to emphasize once again, we're not talking about critiquing Israel, criticizing Israel. Like, for example, as an American, I love my country. I feel like I'm a patriot. At the same time, I feel obliged to critique my country when mistakes are being made. I do it as an insider. There's nobody more critical of Israel than Israelis. They call it a national pastime. And so critiquing Israel is not the issue, but the idea of distorting the definition of Zionism is the issue. Zionism just simply means nothing more, nothing less than the right of Israel to be an independent nation. It has nothing to do with the right of the Palestinians or the right of Syrians or the right of Saudi Arabians to have their own nation. People have the right to have their own country, but the idea that Zionist criminals end the Palestinian Holocaust. And then the next part is the distortion of language, because even if you were critiquing Israel and you didn't like this and that policy, to use the word Holocaust for what's happening when Israel is defending itself, whether you agree with its self-defense or not, it is not a Holocaust, right? We know that. By the definition and any understanding of a Holocaust or apartheid, Israel is not an apartheid state. and there is not a Holocaust. And again, it has nothing to do with critiquing a policy. So we see applied boycott, sanctions, and divestment against Israel. Is BDS by its nature anti-Semitic? It's right on the edge. Some people in the BDS movement are anti-Semitic, some people are not. But once you get into the distortion of language and you say that Zionism is racism, you've really gone over the line. Because again, Zionism, take a look, go Google it yourself, folks. It just means the right of Israel to exist. After World War I and the end of the Ottoman Empire, the decline of the British Empire, there were about 120 nations that were literally recreated or invented all throughout the world. Many of them, like Saudi Arabia, was not a nation. Jordan was not a nation. Kuwait was not a nation. So these nations were being created with the descent of the French and the British empires. And so Zionism arose as the national movement of the Jewish people to be able to return to their own homeland. That's all Zionism means. It doesn't mean other people shouldn't have their homeland, including the Palestinians. So once you get into Zionism as racism, you've gone over the edge. And this is what it leads to. The insanity of ideas that Israel and capitalists are humanity's number one enemies, or the Jewish star equals Nazism. I mean, you know, we have to stand up for this, folks. And when we see these kind of signs, God forbid, we see this kind of language, we have to speak back to it. So then you get to this idea, some of these things seem, well, it's not such a big deal. From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. Well, what they're talking about is the dissolution of the nation of Israel. We're not talking about two-state solution. We're talking about from the river, which is the Jordan River, you know, all the way to the Mediterranean Sea. So now we're going to do a little bit of historical background for those of you who are Christian. I just want you to understand the amazing work and the respect I have, especially for the Catholic Church and many Protestant denominations who are doing the inner work of dealing with anti-Semitism that's systemic within Christianity. It starts with the idea of replacement theology, that God's covenant to the Jewish people has been replaced by a new covenant. The word Old Testament, New Testament, you know, most of us, we use it, we're not even thinking about it, but it really is an aspect of replacement theology, meaning that a New Testament has replaced the Old Testament. The term Israel now refers to the church since Pentecost. The church is the historic continuation of the synagogue to the exclusion of the Jewish people. The Jews, like any other non-Christian, have no place in eternal life of heaven unless they declare Jesus as Lord and Savior. So this deals with the whole issue of missions to the Jewish people, to convert the Jewish people. They seem innocuous in our country, and this somewhat innocuous in our country, but believe me, to my grandparents and my grandparents and my great-grandparents in Europe, it was not innocuous. It was threatening to their very lives. So I'm not going to get into the whole academics, but it's also replacement theology is also called supersessionism. And it's been defined as traditional Christian belief that Christianity is the fulfillment of biblical Judaism, and therefore the Jews who deny that Jesus is the Jewish Messiah fall short of their calling as God's chosen people. Now, when we read the book of Matthew, and we realize what goes on, especially on Good Friday, we see that when Matthew is saying, when Pilate saw that he could not prevail at all, this Pontius Pilate was working for the Roman Empire, and he could not prevail at all amongst, quote unquote, definite article, the Jews, but rather a tumult was rising. He took over and washed his hands before the multitude, saying, I'm innocent of the blood of this just person, which is Jesus. And he says, you see to it. Now listen to this. And all the people answered and says, his blood be upon us and our children. Now, first of all the people, really, Matthew? All the people answered and said, his blood be upon us and our children. So the idea of this creates what's called the blood libel. So what I'm going to be showing you is like startling to many of us to realize, for example, in 1493, is an illustration of perpetrating the claim that Jews murdered Christian children to use their blood to make matzah on Passover. It sounds so crazy to us, you know, in Ashland. But these were illustrations that were not uncommon in the books at the time. These are the Jews taking the blood of a Christian child out of his penis in order to make the matzah kosher for Passover. It sounds insane to us. It sounds crazy to us, but the blood libel lives on. You'll see how it manifests itself today. So look at the upper left. You see a blood libel. This is Ariel Sharon making bricks, building a wall for security out of the blood of Palestinians. And in the lower right, what happened recently, Ivanka's latest product line, the dead of Gaza. Of course, she's a religious Jewish woman. Whether you agree with her politics or not is irrelevant, but this is an example of the modern use of the blood libel against the Jews. Her latest product line, the dead of Gaza. It's disgusting and needs to be responded to in every legal way that we can respond to this. Sadly, the blood libel has been adopted by some in radical Islam. You see the explanation of the blood libel that came out of directly from Christianity being adopted by some of our radical Muslim cousins. Very, very disappointing and sad to see this. Now we want to get something into Judensau, the Jew pig. These are all throughout Europe. This particular one is from the St. Martin's Church in Kalmar in the 13th century. This is a Jew, you can see by the hat, sucking the feces from a pig. And this is actually on a church, believe it or not, to demonstrate their disdain for the Jewish people and for Judaism in general. You say, well, this is a one-off situation. It is not one-off, it's throughout Europe. Judensau carvings, sculptures, and paintings were popular for more than 600 years, beginning in the 13th century. And this particular one is not sucking from the anus of the pig, but actually nursing from the pig itself. In Wittenberg, Germany, this happens to be from the home of Martin Luther, who at first was a great friend of the Jewish people and believed that the Catholics were mistreating the Jews, and that's why they weren't accepting Christ. But he believed that with a tolerance and appreciation for Judaism, that the Jews would finally accept Christ. And he was very disappointed 20, 30 years into his ministry to realizing that the Jewish people in Wittenberg and throughout Germany were simply saying to him, thank you very much, we appreciate your support, but we're still not converting. And this is from actually a book that he wrote, and he used the same Judensau, the Jew pig, of the Jews nursing from a pig. We'll talk about this in a moment. This is his writing. Even with no further evidence than the Old Testament, I would maintain that the Jews as they are today are veritably a mixture of all that is depraved, and I can't see what that word is, I'm sorry, of the whole world, who have then been dispersed in all countries to afflict the different nations with their usury, to spy upon others, to betray, to poison wells, to deceive and kidnap children, in short, to practice all kinds of dishonesty and injury. And then he justifies the Judensau, the Jew pig statue that's in his that was on his very church where he preached. I want to read this to you because ultimately we get to the Holocaust from some of his unbelievable language. Even if they, the Jews, were punished in the most gruesome manner, that the streets ran with their blood, that their dead would be counted, not in the hundreds of thousands, but in the millions, as happened under Vespasian in Jerusalem, and for evil under Hadrian. Still, they must insist on being right, even if after these 1,500 years, they were in misery. Another 1,500 years, still God must be a liar, and they must be correct. In some, they are the devil's children, down to hell. Now, what I'm going to show you next comes out of his writing. It's from a book I urge you to go onto Google to check out. It's called Concerning the Jews and Their Lies. This is not only an excerpt, this is like 1/5, 1/6 or 7th of what he wrote in this booklet that he wrote. I'm only going to read the underlined passages that are in boldface for you. You will not believe this comes from Luther, the founder of the Lutheran Church. And I do want to say that the progressive and more liberal theological Lutheran churches have completely disavowed themselves from this writing of Martin Luther. As genius as he was in the Reformation, nevertheless, his writings in his older age about the Jews become the basis or the roadmap for ultimately what would become the Holocaust. Hitler loved Martin Luther's later writing. What shall we then, what then shall we Christians do with this damned, rejected race of Jews? Remember, only reading the parts that are underlined. First, the synagogues or churches should be set on fire. Secondly, their homes should likewise be broken down and destroyed. Thirdly, they should be deprived of their prayer books and Talmuds. Fourthly, their rabbis must be forbidden under threat of death to teach. Fifthly, passport and traveling privileges should be absolutely forbidden to the Jews. Sixthly, they ought to be stopped from usury. Seventhly, let the young and strong Jews and Jewesses be given the flail, the axe, and the hoe. To sum up, dear princes and nobles who have Jews in your domains, if this advice of mine does not suit you, then find a better one. Find a better one. Find a better one. So the first one is dispersion. On the far left there, this was, of course, during the Roman Empire. In the Arch of Titus in Rome today, you could see this, that the menorah and the gifts, the treasures of the Jewish people in Jerusalem were being stolen and taken to Rome. I just wanted to show you this picture of Moses by Michelangelo, who is not anti-Semitic, but this strange picture of Moses with horns on his head. Because the word for horn in Hebrew is the same word for radiance of light, like what we would call an aura today. And Michelangelo was given faulty information from somebody in Italy and was told that really Moses had horns. And Michelangelo did not intend it that way is certainly one of the microaggressions that we find in the early church or medieval or Renaissance teachings. One of the other solutions is just to throw Jews out. This is just the expulsion of Jews from 1100 to 1600. Wherever the Jews were, they were buying into this myth of the blood libel. They were buying into this myth and story that they heard every Good Friday, that the Jews killed Jesus and deicide, and so they were expelled from everywhere they were living. Was it because of their behavior? No. Were there some creepy Jews? Of course. Were there some Jews who were really creepy? Yes. But was that a cause for throwing them out and expelling them? Absolutely not. That's the root of anti-Semitism, coming from, at least in this period of time, from Christian anti-Semitism that was being taught in the churches. And that's ultimately what it led to. This is the final solution. The final solution. So I want to talk to you about something else when you'll see in Europe if you go there. You go to the beautiful churches. My wife and I love, we went to Italy, and I love going to churches in Mexico and Italy, the beautiful places to meditate. And then you realize also what was being taught in some of these churches and what was part of the architecture itself. So this is called ecclesia and synagogia. Ecclesia means the church, synagogia is the synagogue. Watch what's going to happen here. In the south facade in France at Strasbourg, take a look on the far left. This is ecclesia. She is a beautiful woman holding the chalice, holding the Kiddush cup of Jesus in her hand. She's holding the cross in her right hand. And take a look at its synagogia. She's broken. She has the book of the Torah in her left hand. It's falling to the ground, and she's blindfolded. This is in the Strasbourg Cathedral. You can see it in the south facade in France. It's not unusual to find this all throughout Europe. You're going to see these two women, synagogue and ecclesia. Many of the churches now have signs to educate people about the tragedy of this, but there you go again. On the left is ecclesia. She's successful and triumphant. And on the right is blindfolded synagogia. Now, these are not by their nature hateful of Judaism. They're still hopeful that the Jews can be redeemed by converting to Christianity. But then we get into one level further. Let's kick it up a notch. And what we find in Germany are, take a look at the far left, in St. John's Cathedral in Werben in Germany, that we see ecclesia. She's being blessed by that hand on top, which is God, or an angel of God. And she's carrying the cross triumphant, and she's riding upon a tetramorph, which comes from the book of Ezekiel. I'm not going to go into that, but the beautiful image of the eagle and a lion and the ox and the human. She's riding a tetramorph. And look to the right. That's the Jewish people. That's Judaism. That's synagogue. She's riding on the symbol of the devil, which is a goat, and she's holding the goat's head in her hands. She's being speared with the sword, and her crown is falling off her head. You see the subtlety? Well, to the medieval Jews, to medieval Christians, it wasn't so subtle, right? It was very clear. They weren't just looking at pretty stained glass windows. In an illiterate society, this was the literature. In a culture that didn't read, this was their history. There was no Facebook, there was no CNN or Fox. This was the Facebook of its time, going to church and taking a look at the stained glass windows. In Erfurt, in Cathedral, in Germany, we see the same image on the left. We see the church, and now she's directly attacking and spearing the synagogue, who's riding now on a pig. This relates to the Judensau, the Jew pig imagery that I spoke about before. Is this shocking to you? So when you go home, take a look at synagogue and ecclesia. You'll see much more data than I'm able to give in one brief lecture tonight. Jews killed God. What a concept. From Thessalonians in the New Testament. For you, brethren, became imitators of the churches of God in Christ Jesus, which are in Judea. For you suffered the same things from your own countrymen, the Jews, as they did from the Jews who killed both the Lord Jesus and the prophets, and drove us out to displease God and oppose all men. So here we have the idea that the Jews killed both the Lord Jesus and the prophets. The concept of deicide begins. I was very blessed in my generation, growing up in the 50s, not to be called a Christ killer too often. My father was called, who grew up in Brooklyn in the early 1900s, a Christ killer very often. And my grandfather was certainly, back in the Ukraine, a Christ killer. It was a common term. Many of us here who are Jewish, would you please raise your hand if you've ever heard the term Christ killer from somebody in your family who is called Christ killer? This is not an unusual term. It may be unusual at the co-op in Ashland, but it certainly was not unusual to our ancestors. Pilate said to the chief priests and officers, take him yourselves and crucify him, for I find no crime in him. The Jews answered him, we have a law, and by that law he ought to die, because he has made himself the Son of God. First of all, I just want to stop there. That's ridiculous, because every Jewish person, every human being is considered a son or a daughter of God. So to call yourself a son of God is a very common term in the Torah. When you read the Hebrew, the son of God or the children of God is a term for all of us. Anyway, he said to the Jews, here is your king. They cried out, away with him, crucify him. So even though the modern progressive church does not blame the Jews for the direct crucifixion of Jesus, the Jews are blamed for saying, away with him, crucify him. Now, what can be done with this? Because this is what you read on Good Friday in most churches, is it needs to be unpacked. Many progressive pastors in the progressive churches are unpacking this or changing the language from the book of John, which is by its nature systemically anti-Semitic. Again, I want to say to every Christian that's here, which is about probably a third of you or half of you, I am not denigrating Christianity at all. There's plenty of terror texts in my own scriptures, in the Holy Torah. I have to deal with my own terror text. Christians, you've got to deal with your own terror text. Muslims, you've got to deal with your own terror text. Terror texts exist in every religion in the world. But this certainly was one of the bases for anti-Semitism, was the crucifixion of God. The Jews are of Satan. You and your father are the devil, and the lust of your father you will do, from John. Again, John is very, very disturbing book, and that's the book where the Passion stories are read on Good Friday in most churches. Justin Martyr. Now we're going to come into the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th century. I'm telling you, folks, when you read the beginning of the church, these guys were geniuses. I respect them. Their theology was incredible. They were trying to bring the idea of monotheism in an ancient world where human sacrifice and child sacrifice still existed. Every one of these people were tremendous leaders of the early church movement, and almost every single one of them, including the most heartbreaking of all, St. Augustine, were anti-Semitic at some level. Those who slandered him, this is Jesus, should be miserable. Jews suffer because they are guilty of not having recognized the one, Jesus, with whom they had to do in their own history. When he appeared, they killed him. Not knowing this one, the logo, Jews failed to know God. Justin Martyr. Origen, another great church father. The Jews suffer here and will suffer in the hereafter on account of their unbelief. Here Origen is quoting Paul. And other insults which they heaped upon Jesus. These calamities they have suffered because they were a most wicked nation, which although guilty of many other sins, yet has been punished so severely for none as those that were committed against our own Jesus. Origen. Again, those of you who are Christian maybe know these fellows. They were the great leaders comparable in Judaism to our own Hillel and Shammai and some of our own great teachers in the first century. No Jew worships God. This is John Chrysostom, probably in the 4th century and 5th century, one of the greatest geniuses of all early Christianity. No Jew worships God. Certainly not in the synagogue, a temple of idolatry. The Jews lie for their bellies. They gape for the things of this world. Their condition is no better than that of pigs or goats because of their wanton ways and excessive gluttony. They know but one thing, to fill their bellies and be drunk. It's so beautiful in 1963, this incredible Pope John the 23rd called for Nostra Aetate. And he said that we realize now that many, many centuries of blindness have dimmed our eyes, so that we no longer see the beauty of thy chosen people and no longer recognize in their faces the features of our firstborn brother. We realize that our brows are branded, with the mark of Cain. Centuries long has Abel lain in blood and tears because we had forgotten thy love. Forgive us this curse which we have unjustly laid on the name of the Jews. Forgive us that with our curse we are crucified. We crucified a second time. We crucified thee a second time. This is pretty unbelievable. He's saying that because of the hatred we've shown to the Jews, we've crucified Christ a second time. This was a noble man, a powerful, courageous man, to be able to say that we've crucified Jesus a second time. Please read the full text of this when you go home. Just Google Pope John the 23rd, an amazing man. It can't be underestimated. The response to it by people like Mel Gibson in what he called his passion story, I call it the lethal passion, was to really bring back the blame against the Jews for killing Jesus, against the Pope of the Catholic Church in 1963. Hope for the future. If you can read this, would you read it with me? Nation, lift up sword against nation. Neither shall they learn war anymore. But every sit under his vine and under his fig tree, and no one shall make them afraid. For the mouth of the Lord of hosts has spoken. For all people walk in the name of his God, and we will walk in the name of the Holy One, our God, forever and ever. That's our hope. None of us should be afraid. I'm sitting here with my adrenaline going, with a certain degree of fear. I shouldn't be afraid to be in our own synagogue here in Ashland. The other two synagogues, all three of us should not be afraid. The mosque should not be afraid. The LGBT center at Southern Oregon University should not be afraid. Women should not be afraid of sexual abuse and misogyny. None of us should be afraid. Do you agree with that? Yes. God bless you and thank you for coming this evening and being an ally to the Jewish people. We are there for you as well.